The fact that I'm alive, healthy, is a miracle. I wrote down on a piece of paper, I'll never be a father, I'll never be a husband, I'll never contribute to the world in a way that leaves a positive change. Like, that was my suicide note. I made a very clear plan to end my life. In the middle of that, I even needed someone to essentially agree with me that that was a good idea. And the way that I was going to get someone to do that was...
On this episode, we have Joshua Broome. He was in the adult film business, transitioned, became a pastor, is now a speaker around the world, has a book, he's an author, a family man, a man of God, but you have to hear this story. It's probably one of the wildest stories you may ever hear. We go deep into the conversation around sex, pornography, marriage, living a life on purpose. This is a very important conversation. I think every man should hear it. Let's dive in.
I did a lot of things that I were not proud of. Those things became who I was. When you detach from your humanity, you can do something that's outside of who you are. That's not your identity. You don't get to define yourself based upon what you did. That's not who you are. You are not defined by the worst thing you ever done, and you're not defined by the greatest thing you ever did.
My name is Skylar Lewis, and I've helped thousands of men and their families step into their God-given potential. And this podcast is all about that. We bring on some of the highest performing men in the areas of faith, family, fitness, and finances, where they share their success principles, they share their struggles, they share the specific things that they have done to build a life of abundance and kingdom impact. Don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get to the episode.
So Joshua, welcome to the show.
Hey man, so glad to be here. I'm glad we made this happen.
I know, I'm excited. You're local, and man, you have a story to tell, and you've been speaking all around the country and world.
Yeah.
Speaking on just the conversation that we'll dive into.
Sure.
And I actually love to dive right into it. So what would you say? Tell me about your journey. Going from your childhood and maybe what some of the triggers were that led you into the porn industry, and we'll go through that phase.
Yeah, I mean, so me growing up in a very small town, so my mom got pregnant with me at 15, had me at 16, and my dad lived in that small town. And one thing about a small town, that if anyone listening is from a small town, they get this, where it only takes one person to know one thing about your life for everyone to know everything about your life. Yep. And everyone knew that I didn't have a dad. I was the only kid that was at football practice, basketball games, like whatever, and my dad's not there. And what was interesting is that my dad was in very close proximity to me. So he gets married. I was born when he was 16. He gets married at 18, and then all of a sudden has this life with a wife, and then eventually kids. And I can see the person that is my dad, but he's never my father. And just the way that men and many women are wired, we are wired to be high achievers. And that high achiever personality, if you factor in brokenness, what happens is you believe that you can fix yourself in a way. You feel like if I do enough, or if I accomplish enough, I will feel as if I'm enough. Because just the way the brain is wired, our brain is wired by God for us to navigate, through conflict, and we have to create a narrative. There's something that we don't understand, and it's not explained to us, or it's not reconciled by someone that knows more than us. We create a narrative on our own to relieve the conflict. And what I believed was, well, if he is not choosing me, and he is in such close proximity where he sees me, because I'm seeing this man on pretty much a daily basis or a weekly basis, because, one gas station, one grocery store. So I was seeing him, and I thought, well, there must be something wrong with me. It must be my fault that he's not choosing me. So the way that I navigated that was, well, if I become better, maybe he'll want me, or maybe at least I can, supersede my inadequacy with trying harder or becoming better or doing enough. And that drove me to be the best student, to be the best athlete. And those things were good things, but when you do good things for reasons that are not good, then,
wrong motives.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, it's like, great student, great athlete, all this stuff. But when I was around 13 years old, I started modeling and acting, and that was kind of like the new thing in which I found success in, which I found my identity in. around the same time I saw pornography for the first time. I was at my cousin's house. He showed me this hardcore magazine, and all of a sudden I started, I see this and I'm intrigued, yet I feel shame. And it's like this cognitive dissonance where it's like there's two things happening simultaneously in my mind and my heart, where I want to look, but I know that I shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that drove me, to think, well, maybe this is something, if I kind of reenacted what I saw in those pages, I'll feel emotions that I don't. Because for me, I didn't have any visual representation of a healthy dynamic at home. I never saw my mom in a relationship. My grandparents, they were together, but like my grandfather was like fishing every day. They didn't sleep in the same bedroom. So regarding a depiction of intimacy, I didn't have one. So when I saw pornography, I thought, well, maybe if I partake in what I see, I'll feel what I don't. And I started living this very promiscuous lifestyle. I'm hooking up, and that's now part of my conquest mentality, and that follows me into college. I'm in a fraternity, I'm studying theater, I'm having success, I'm doing well in all these ventures. And then I think, okay, it makes sense for me now, my next step, to be in closer proximity to the industry I want to be in. So I had talked with several agents and managers in Hollywood, and they were like, if you move out here, we'd love to represent you. We think that you would do well. And I did, and got a manager, and I'm having more success in modeling than acting, but I'm doing okay. It's like I have a place to live, I have representation. I'm at the Improv in LA. It's like I'm doing, not crushing it, but I'm doing okay. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of that, I'm at a bar in West Hollywood on Sunset Boulevard, and essentially 3 headhunters come up to me that work for the porn industry. These 3 girls that were looking for attractive guys, attractive girls, saying, hey, theoretically, if you were invited or you had the opportunity to do porn, would you be interested? Because I can introduce you to our agent. And I was like, 3 very attractive girls asking me this, and I'm just like, sure, I'll meet with your agent. And I thought, like, if it was sketchy, like, I was going to bounce. If it was like, if it was a conversation at like Motel 6 or something like that, I'm out of there.
Yeah.
If he's like some old guy like picking, lint out of his belly button, I was going to hightail it out of there. But instead, it was in this, business complex. It was adjacent to Universal Studios and Studio City, and I walk in, and there's a receptionist, and I walk down this hallway, and then as I'm walking down the hallway, it's got the girls that have made the cover of Penthouse, Playboy, like what have you, and I get to the end of the hallway, and there's an office there, and he's sitting there, and it's this English guy in this 3-piece suit, like big fat like double Windsor tie, and he was like, hey, kind of cut straight to the chase. He's like, hey, I'd love to know, like, why are you here? And I want to know 3 questions. The answer to 3 questions. How did you grow up? What are you doing in LA? And what do you hope to accomplish? And in retrospect, like, how did you grow up? Like, should have been a red flag question, because essentially, like, people ask sometimes, like, well, is there any sex trafficking, or does sex trafficking happen within the porn industry? Well, the 3 things that define sex trafficking is force, fraud, and coercion. And not only does that exist in pornography, it's dependent upon it. So there's this guy who is wanting to extract value from me, and he's asking me, essentially, are you vulnerable? Are you someone that I can manipulate? And the number one answer is, do you come from a broken home? Wow. Is the raw language. But he's saying, hey, how did you grow up? Yep. And I said, well, I grew up pretty much me and my mom. So green flag for him. Yep. And then I'm like, well, I'm in LA trying to do what many people are doing. I'm trying to navigate through this creative space, and I guess I'm trying to be famous is the thing I'm trying to accomplish. And I think that is probably the most interesting thing I said, because if someone's goal is to be rich or famous, more often than not, there's a metric that you've attached to something that's somewhat vague, and that metric is fictitious in a way, because what equates to being famous? Like, how many followers, like how many people, how much success equates to that? And if you set a metric that is going to resolve something emotionally or mentally in you, and you reach it, guess what? It doesn't work. Yep. And then you just, maybe more will work, or maybe something different will work, and then and money's the same way.
Yeah,
And
everything we do is for some feeling,
Yeah.
right? So everything human beings do is we want to feel some emotion, happiness, fulfillment. Like we want to feel the emotion. So, right, famous is going to make us feel good.
yeah, and it's,
Right.
especially it's like the way that most people are wired. Like unless you grow up in a very secure environment, more often than not, especially with men, our number one love language is words of affirmation.
Yep.
And it's like we want to hear the things that we didn't
Yep.
as a kid.
We're looking for significance.
Yeah,
We want to
yeah.
feel that we're valuable.
Yeah, it's like ultimately, like
Yeah.
when we were created, God created us to be seen and known. But the way that we're seen and known regarding the kingdom is very different than our, when we superimpose our humanity
Yeah.
onto our understanding of what it means to be seen, to be known. But in that moment, it's like, sure, everything he said, it's like, okay, sure. What's next? And he's like, well, you're a good looking guy. You've got acting experience. I feel like, you could be the next, star. I can make you famous. I can give you this X, Y, and Z. And I was like, I knew it was a bad idea. I knew it was a counterfeit version of the dream that I had. But, it's crazy to say, but like at that point in my career, I've been at it for a while, and even though I was having some success, I wasn't having as much success as some of my peers. And I think, in this world, it's been said often, comparison is a thief of joy. And,
Yep.
I had succeeded in a way where it's like just the fact that I, was at the Improv in LA, it's like that was an accomplishment in itself. I had a manager, I had a roof over my head. I was paying my bills doing something that I loved. But I wasn't as successful as some other people were. So I thought, well, I'll never make it. Maybe I'm just not good enough. And I think when you think that, you're subjective to, compromise in some way. And I thought, okay, well, if you're saying, I can win in this industry, it's almost like, the same thinking as someone. It's like, well, if I can't, obviously this is a whole different conversation, but if I can't win as one gender, if I can't, I can't, be the best at swimming as a man, I bet if I changed my identity and I could win in this way. And I think like that's a pretty broad example of that, but there's so many times where it's like, well, I'm not willing to risk or put in the work to be successful to the capacity in which maybe I could or I desire. So I would rather compromise in some way so that I can win in some area. And I think that's why pornography is so attractive, because what you do, you don't have to put yourself out there. You don't have to risk being rejected, and it's easy. And pornography is so prevalent and so destructive because it works. And it works in that it does the thing in which you hope to do, which is to numb, the thing that is hurting, or to give you the thing that you're desiring, even though it's a ripoff of what you're actually desiring.
Before you finish that story, what are some stats?
Yeah. So, we look at the world. So pornography, it's making, regarding revenue, more money than the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the NFL all combined.
Wow.
It's viewed more than Amazon, Netflix, and Twitter on a daily basis combined, and it's by a significant margin. If you look at how much data is on the internet on a daily basis, so 35% of all the data that's transferred on the internet on a daily basis is pornography. And there's a lot of new research that came out a few weeks ago. So Barna did their first big deep dive, a full year of studies, and they saw pornography consumption regarding people who identify as followers of Jesus up 400%. And then regarding the age demographic 18 to 24, 92% of men who identify as followers of Jesus consuming porn at minimum once a month, and 67% of women on a monthly basis consuming pornography. Yeah, so that's gone up 400%. And then a wild statistic where it's like, man, it transcends any kind of whatever you adhere to theologically, whatever group you might find yourself in. So this is from the 4 major law firms that deal with divorces. So this is a secular reference. 51% of the divorces that have happened over the last 2 years, pornography was the primary catalyst. So either pornography was the reason for the divorce, or pornography led to a deeper level of infidelity that was catalytic in the divorce. So I would say, man, like you're just looking at it. So like pornography, 94% of it contains violence, and we're seeing in a real way, people are watching this, forming thoughts and preferences for things that they're attached to, the way in which they believe sex is to be engaged in, and they're superimposing these things that they're learning from porn. It's like, it's
and people don't realize how twisted and how intertwined it actually gets, right? It took me years of desexualization for me personally, right? I was so sexualized, right, from my pornography challenges and addiction, from finding my first porn magazine at 12 all the way through my teenage years to my adult years, through my even marriage, right? Even though it was much less than marriage, right? Whether it be 4 times a year or 10 times a year, as it was fading down, it took so much longer to remove the preferences and the ways of behaving and operating and some of the objectification. And man, I'm even now noticing, right, 14 years into marriage, I believe now at probably the most healthy place I've ever been. And I would say it was really healthy over the last probably 7, 8, 9 years. However, it's just different. I'm not stuff like the lustful feelings and thoughts and just sexualization is just so, I didn't think that stuff could ever go away. I thought it was just built into me, but I was just so hypersexualized.
I mean, just like some people think like, well, like how could this affect me? Well, you look at the Civil War. So when the Civil War was happening, this was the first time that the printing press, they're like in London, they're finally distributing worldwide, and the soldiers that were fighting in the Civil War, they were receiving mass quantities of pornography for the first time, and this is the first time that's documented that there was really a mass, just an ask from the church. We're saying, hey, we need chaplains to come in and visit these soldiers. Why? Well, you look at the brain, pornography impacts the prefrontal cortex to the extent where it impacts your prudency. It impacts your will. So meaning that soldiers were not wanting to go into battle. Soldiers were not caring about the person on their left and their right. Why? Because it causes you to objectify people to the extent where if I can't extract value from you, then, well, I'm learning that that's not something that I should do. So it was impacting your willingness to do difficult things.
Well,
and, I speak at, a few different NFL teams, NBA teams, and we talk about, well, is your desire to reach your utmost capacity? Do you want to be as effective as a man as you could be? Well, when you consume pornography, neurologically, it impacts your willingness to do difficult things. And maybe you have great work ethic, but is the bar in which you're striving after minimized? Like what you perceive to be hard, are you actually pushing, to the extent in which you could, or are you stopping because it's uncomfortable? And has the things in which you've learned impacted how you see? Yes, certainly.
Yeah, it's interesting. That makes total sense, because the will's like a muscle, right? It can be strengthened. And the best way to strengthen it is through scripture and really developing. He can develop our will at an incredible level. And so what happens though is as we do things that we know we shouldn't be doing, and we give into those, and we get that hit of dopamine, and we get this release, right? Something happens to our will. Like it starts to weaken our will. It makes total sense.
Yeah.
Like if I want to wake up early and I don't wake up early, the more I don't wake up early, my will is actually starting to diminish. My strength of my will. So when I'm looking at porn and I kind of know I really shouldn't be doing it, and I do it and I do it and I do it, my will, which is the driver of like all human behavior, is like that's our will. Our will gets weakened. And so that's so interesting.
I mean, you look at certain aspects of the fruit of the Spirit. So Galatians like 5:22 and 23. It's like you look at, well, what are some of the fruits? Well, perseverance and self-control. And when I refuse to persevere and I lack having self-control, or to use your language of what you said, when I willingly choose to do something I ought not do or know that I shouldn't do, or even worse, if I confront my convictions and saying, hey, I know, and I'm even saying that this is part of who I am at my nucleus, yet I'm saying I'm going to do something that I know contradicts the thing that I say that is most important, to me. When I do that, I'm going to minimize my willingness to do good work in every aspect of my life, because compromise is only going to lead to compromise, not only in that facet, but it's going to bleed over into other areas of my life.
Yeah. So, and this is not only for pornography, right? This is for anything else. When you eat what you're not supposed to be eating, when you like these things, it really negatively affects us.
Well, yeah, where it's like, well, I mean, that the whole mentality of like, well, I'm just gonna eat. I know that I'm gonna, I want to be strict on my diet. I'm gonna do I'm doing a 21-day cleanse or whatever, and I'm not gonna eat any processed sugar or whatever. And then it's like, well, I'm in a green room and there's a Pop-Tart there, and it's like, seems good, seems convenient. What harm could it do? And then all of a sudden I eat that Pop-Tart, and then, I'm in my hotel room later that night, and it's like, as I'm ordering Uber Eats or whatever, it's like, I'm probably going to make a decision that's different than the decision that I would have made if I would have chosen to execute a disciplined decision. Yeah. Because I love that, like, discipline has been said, it's like, man, it's the greatest form of self-love, because if I'm not willing to keep my promises to myself, how well am I going to treat other people?
And that can come from, right, so there's a 2 Timothy 1:7, for the Spirit of the Lord, he doesn't give us a spirit of being timid, but of power, love, and self-discipline, or a sound mind. So like he gives us the power and the discipline. He gives it to us, but we have to practice and continue to live it out, or we lose it.
Yeah.
Like that's the deal. Like we can start to diminish our self-discipline. Like he's the foundation. But man, like that's why it's so critical staying in the Word. There's guys that are listening to this, they're like, oh yeah, I read a verse a day. Now really spending time digging into the meat of the Word like starts to shift your soul, your will, your self-discipline.
Yeah.
It's like really it transforms you. So if guys are stuck and they're looking for this outside personal development process, or like, hey, how do I? Like, yeah, dude, because that was me. I was a personal development junkie back in the day. Like, I wanted to go to every seminar, every coaching, coaching experience.
Same here, where it's like, someone turned me on to 21 Laws of Leadership, and I didn't know that these were the aspects of biblical truths. Like, it was contextualized into leadership language. But yeah, kind of the same thing. But I mean, I love comparing it to a push-up, right? So if you do a push-up incorrectly, with your elbows out and you're internally rotating your shoulders and you're not going all the way down, maybe you're doing 100 push-ups a day, but you're reintegrating to your body poor movement mechanics, and it's detrimental to your shoulders. And maybe you'll get a little fitter, and maybe you'll get a little stronger, but you're not moving in a way that you were designed, and it's even if you're building some strength, you're not building as much strength as you could, and along the way you're setting yourself up, to tear your pec or to tear your rotator cuff. So it's like if I take the time to contextualize Scripture, where I know, okay, I'm going to read one verse out of Ephesians, and I'm just going to like take it out of context, and like, well, I read it. Well, if I understand, Paul wrote Ephesians to the church in Ephesus, and the language in which he's using, it's to followers of Jesus, and it's so that they can understand what they're supposed to do as followers of Jesus, as the body, which is called the church. So it's not a building, it's a people. And here's information so that you understand, like, aspects like, well, there's members of the body that, just because you're not doing what someone else is doing doesn't mean you're not effective or not as important. There's certain aspects that we are all called to do collectively. So if you understand the context, you'll understand the content. And where I'm competent, I can be more confident.
Oh, there we go.
So
there we
go. So it's like, that's, I mean, that's where it's at. It's where
Yep.
it's like, that's why it's so important to not only read the Bible, but study it. Who, it's great study Bibles out there. Who wrote it? What was the theme? What was the purpose of the writings? And now, don't just read one sentence, like read the paragraph before it and after it, so I can understand the context, so I can rightly apply it to my life.
So good. So let's go back to the story then. So you're in this guy's office. What a wild story. You're in this guy's office. He's offering you an opportunity to be in the porn industry and selling you the dream of being a porn star. And so
I did one scene. I didn't count the cost, and when you don't count the cost, it costs you more than you were willing to pay, So I did one film, and I didn't think much of it, and it was so different than I thought it would be. I thought I was going to have like this is like early like 2000, so I thought I was going to like go into a room with a camcorder and no one's going to ever know, and I'm going to get a check at the end of it. Instead, I walk into a large, studio. There's, receptionist, there's catering, there's makeup, there's this, large production. There's camera A, camera B, someone shooting BTS and like all this stuff. And it was a large website. And I get there, and a PA comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, here's a Viagra. If you've never taken one, I would bite it in half if I were you. It's yours. You've touched it. It's yours. Do with it whatever you want, but we need you in 30 minutes." And then it's like, like a scene from every movie where like, I'm looking at myself in the mirror, like not necessarily giving myself a pet talk, but it's like, what the heck am I doing here? How did I get here? And again, around manipulation, coercion, I got picked up in a very nice town car, and I was taken to the studio. Yet I didn't know it was an undisclosed location. So for me to leave, essentially I would have to be like, a kid at a sleepover saying, "Hey, I changed my mind," because there was no way for me to get back from, to where I was, because I didn't have anyone to call. So I'm like looking at myself. I'm like, man, the lie that people tell themselves so often, it's like, I've gone too far to turn back. I can't take a U-turn because I've gone 5 miles down this road, and I'm committed. Even if I know I'm going the wrong way, I'm gonna see it out, because it's gonna be so inconvenient, or it's gonna be shameful, or it's gonna be so difficult for me to make this Yui. So I'm like, okay, well, it is what it is. I'm gonna just do it, and I pop the whole Viagra, pound this water, and then I just like go to this set, and I think, it's going to be this moment with me and this girl. And it's like, the girl's not looking at me, looking at the camera. I'm not like engaging in like normal sexual activity with the girl. Like the director's telling me exactly what to do. I'm like opened up the camera. It's uncomfortable. Doesn't feel great. There's no like connectivity there. And it's such a fictitious representation of what we think's happening. Because when you see a porn, it looks as, okay, the two people are enjoying it, they're connected with each other, and it looks as if you just captured this intimate moment and you're just taking a peek in. Well, that's the point. It's a fantasy. And in the same way, there's a director, there's two paid actors, there's editing, there's CGI, there's all this stuff that happens, and the product at the end product is a fictitious representation of something you think is sex. And it looks like sex and makes you feel as if you're seeing sex, because in a way you are, but that's the point. The point is to provide you with a product that creates an appetite in you so that you want more of it. That's why it's so effective, because it's done well and it works. So for me, I do that. I'm just like, man, that was disgusting. I felt gross. It wasn't anything like I thought it would be. It's like literally I'm doing this, and there's people all around me. There's like literally like, people watching, like eating chips, like it's some kind of show. So wow. I was like, I'm never doing this again. And it was like, I got like $500 for it, so I was just like, this is, never doing this again. Few days pass. And then it goes up on the website, and it was, at the time, most popular porn website, and it goes viral. And then all of a sudden, again, being from a small town, it only takes one person to see you for everyone to talk about you. And all of a sudden word gets to my uncle, and then my uncle tells my mom, and then my mom's calling me, and she's like, coming from the South, it's like, how much of your name gets used is how much trouble you're in. So like Joshua Broome, did you do a porno? And I was just like, I did, Mom. And I'm so sorry, and I had hurt the person that, the only person that had never hurt me. And, at that time, I didn't have a biblical foundation. I went to church until I was like 7, but after that, there was really no like me being in church at all. I didn't have I had heard the gospel maybe, but I certainly didn't comprehend it or understand it. I didn't have a relationship with Jesus whatsoever. Best case, I would say, sure, God created everything. And so, like, I say that to say, like, my identity was grafted in, or who I would have said I was. I'm my mother's son. That's the thing that I'm most sure of. She would never, let anything happen to me. If I needed something, she would be there. If I was hungry, she would feed me. Hurt, she would help me. And when I hurt her, what happened is the lie in which Satan had planted in my head that you're not good enough. There's something wrong with you. You're bad. You're broken. I proved myself right. When I hurt my mom, I proved myself right. And when that happened, and the byproduct of that, and this is 2006, very different world back then. So my mainstream agent that was representing me for modeling and acting, when now my name is associated with porn, calls me into their office, and they're like, "Hey, unfortunately, because of this, we can no longer represent you. I think a lot of you, but unfortunately, we can't do business with you anymore. I wish you the best." And so now I can't do what I, wanted to do, and I've hurt my mom. So the way that you can respond to pain in that way, it's, well, either, you're apologetic and you try to fix it, and the guilt that you feel, it leads you away from what you did, or the way that shame works is shame, it kind of teaches you or causes you to believe the lie that becomes true to you, is that this is not something I've done. This is who I am. And if the shame in me has been catalytic in me believing that, well, this is who I am. If I'm a bad person, of course I'm going to do bad things. So at that point, I was like, well, I guess this is the only thing I can do. And then the porn agent calls me. He's like, "Hey, that went really well. I'd love to offer you a long-time contract." And then I said yes. And then I feel like in a blink of an eye, it had been, over 6 years, and I'd done over 1,000 movies. And yes, I made millions of dollars and won tons of awards and traveled the world and did all this stuff. But at what cost? The cost of, to this day, 41 people that I was in the industry with have either committed suicide or died of overdose. Many more have died of, they've been murdered or been, intoxicated and fell off of buildings or did something that caused them losing their life. I should be dead. There's people that I've had unprotected sex with that had HIV and died. So the fact that I'm alive and healthy is a miracle.
Wow.
But 6.5 years of doing that. So from like the summer of 2012 to the January of 2013. From 2006. So summer of 2006 to January of 2013, I was in the industry, and thought same kind of like what we're talking about. Well, once I make my first million, something about that is going to, change something in my heart or mind. And I'm tracking, and I got my little spreadsheets, and then I make the money, and then I don't feel any different. And then well, if I win Performer of the Year, and then for 4 years, I got nominated for Performer of the Year, and I would lose. And then on the fourth year, in 2012, I won Performer of the Year. And I thought, okay, the show's on Showtime, and it's like go on the stage, accept the award. Like, I'm the guy, the industry, and has chosen me as the best in that industry. It didn't make me feel any different. And when it didn't change me in the way I thought it would, the anxiety that I already felt was amplified. The depression that I already had was deepened. And I thought, well, if this can't fix me, maybe I'm broken beyond repair, and suicide was the only thing. So I made a very clear plan to end my life. And in the middle of that, I even needed someone to essentially agree with me that was a good idea. And the way that I was going to get someone to do that was, I had, payroll checks, and on the payroll checks, they would write antagonistic things on the memo. Either the title was very graphic, or they would write some kind of action where it would depict clearly that you were being compensated for sex. And wow. I would normally Dropbox, ATM, mobile deposit, anything other than hand it to a person. But on this day, that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to walk in, I wanted to slide it across the counter to a teller, and I wanted her to look me in the eye and tell me I'm disgusting as I think I am. or, maybe like shake her head in disgust or say something under her breath. But I wanted her to do something so that I would feel something that would justify me doing what I wanted to do. And when I walked in, I slid that check across the counter. Nothing happened. And I'm like shaking, I'm sweating, and I'm terrified. And she doesn't respond. And then she hands me the receipt after I deposited the check. And then as I'm turning to walk away, she comes around the counter. She kind of whispers to me. She says, "Joshua, can I help you? Can I get someone? Is there something we can do? How can we help you?" Because obviously I'm not okay. And I think like that was, Acts 16, like Paul is with his jailer, they've been imprisoned. This jailer had one job, to keep people where they were put. Earthquake happens, jail cells open up. He looks around. It's dark. Doors are opened. Obviously prisoners are going to escape. He grabs a sword to end himself because corporal punishment in Roman culture, it's not, it happens sometimes. It's the expectation. So he thought, I'm just going to take this into my own hands. He grabs a sword and goes to take his life. And Paul just simply says boldly, "Don't harm yourself. I'm right." And I think that's what God used in her to say, "Hey, I see you. The way in which you thought that you were going to get confirmation that you didn't matter, I want you to know that you do." And the fact that in this point in my life, I hadn't heard my real name in over a year. Because in the industry, you go by a pseudonym. And it's not, something that is, well, let's find them a catchy name. No. When you detach from who you are, you detach from your humanity, and you're going to be more likely to do something that you would never do. You're going to be so much more likely to be manipulated, to be coerced, because your humanity is being removed to a certain extent. Is like if you look at any antagonist on social media, never have a profile picture, always have an obscure username, because when you detach from your humanity, you can do something that's outside of who you are. So that in the same way that's their strategy in the porn industry. So in the same way, I had believed that Joshua was dead, and I was going by this alternate identity that I had allowed my barber, the people that I went to the gym with, everyone that I did life with on a daily basis, to call me that name. But anyone that truly cared about me enough to say, "Hey, what are you doing with your life? You got to stop this. You're better than this," I pushed them away. So I only had people patting me on my back on my way to hell.
Create your own silo. Yep.
Yeah, I was absolutely in my own silo. So it's so like when she said my name, it was the first time in a year I had heard my name. So that was it kind of like snapped me out of this like plausible reality that I had created based on shame. And I called my mom. My mom never stopped calling me. She called and texted me like on a weekly basis. I just didn't return the calls or texts because I thought I disqualified myself from being her son, and it had nothing to do with her and everything to do with me. And I called her, and she lit me up. She chewed me out because like people were literally dying around me. Like you could see that on the news. Like my roommates were dying. People around me were committing suicide. People were dying of AIDS. For a moment, the industry shut down because there was an outbreak of HIV. Wow. So like her concern was beyond like, is he okay? Does he have everything he needs? Like, no, like people are dying that I'm, having close interactions with. So her being upset was very justified. But then after she got that off her chest, she said to me everything that I didn't think she would. "I'll always love you. You'll always be my son. And I would just please beg you, please come home." And so I did. I quit the industry that day. Wow. So like called everyone I needed to call. I quit, like broke contracts. I got someone to sublease my townhouse, and I left. And then I get home, and I'm thinking like, okay, what am I going to do? And
the same town, that same small town.
So I was there for a moment, but I ended up moving to Raleigh, North Carolina.
Got it, Raleigh. Okay.
And because I was like, okay, I was going to get a job in the fitness industry, so I was like, I was doing CrossFit, had a level 1 like certification just because that's what you did. And then I was like, well, I've got this level 1 certification from CrossFit. and then like CrossFit at this point was like relatively new. So like this, 2000, this is like 2013. So the fact that I've got like credentials from like Santa Cruz, Southern California, it just looked as if like, okay, like he knows what's up, even though I didn't. But there was a guy that, kind of the same mentality. I met this guy. He was a strength and conditioning coach for the Carolina Hurricanes. He was willing to mentor me, poured into me, and then I had the financial stability to get like every credential under the sun. So I stacked credentials. I got a great mentor. He provided me with a network, and then all of a sudden I found myself doing the same thing that I did because I had this entrepreneurial mentality, even in the industry. It's like very quickly got an LLC, doubled down. Like, I found myself, writing movies, producing movies, like directing for companies, just because that was in my DNA. So in the same way in the fitness industry, doubled down, got the credentials, did the work, did the networking, and found myself very successful in the health and fitness space. And then, I was like, okay, how can I optimize this? Well, I can do online personal training as well. And I'm doing all this stuff, but I'm trying to hide who I am at the same time. And what I was trying to hide in a way was like, well, I know I can only hide to a certain extent because people are going to know who I am because, there was a pretty significant paper trail to who I was. And even the first week when I was in Raleigh, I'm in Whole Foods, and someone comes up to me and is like, hey, aren't you that guy? I was like,
trying to run away from it, and it's
following
you
like
around.
I deleted my social media, like covered up tattoos, shaved my head, thinking that, but it didn't work. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, I can't hide, so maybe I can put enough good dirt on my bad dirt so I don't look dirty. And what I mean by that is I thought that if I did enough good, even though the bad was visible, maybe that would supersede the bad. So maybe, because I didn't believe that I could change as a person. So what I did believe was maybe I can manage the perception of other people if I do enough good things and have enough, credentials and credibility and the right mentors. Maybe that would supersede the ugly parts about it.
Wow, that happens so often with human beings, right?
Well, that's what we do. Especially as men are like the primary culture where we pretend like we're okay when we're not, and the way that we put on the mask of success, we put on the mask of fitness, we put on the mask of whatever it is, so that it covers up the wounded or the broken or the parts that we're not so proud of. And it's like, well, if I can stack the scale in this way, even if these aspects of my life aren't true or not visible, maybe these things will outshine or cover up these things.
Yeah, many times from my experience of working with a lot of entrepreneurs, most entrepreneurs or people in business have some major gap there where they're looking for significance. They're looking to prove themselves, and so they've built big companies, they have nice cars, they do great deeds at church, and they're giving back. Like, however, the external way that it is represented may look good, but the motive, like we talked about in the beginning, is the most important part. It's okay to have a nice house, it's okay to have a nice car, it's okay to have a great business, but what's the reason behind it?
Yeah. And I would love to dig into this if we have time on the other side of that, because on the other side of that, I think like a healed and whole person will like have trauma around success, and even when you're being like impactful and effective and you're doing good things, and maybe you're seeing like hopes and dreams come to fruition, things that you believed in your heart, that you had a desire for, but you didn't have a real belief and they could come to fruition because it was too big, it's too much, or you're too inadequate, and those things come to fruition, you have a hard time feeling happy about those things. Or more often, and this was part of my story, that I felt guilty and ashamed for being pleased for being successful. Because I'm like, how can I, enjoy this, because this was something I convinced myself that I was unworthy of.
Even not being a Christian. Yeah, because I typically see that with many Christians, right? It's more of a religious or dogmatic view on success.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a bad thing. And so as they start to create success, they start to have this innate kind of guilt that starts creeping in, and they feel bad about, but they'll still do it. They'll still do these nice, have a nice car, have a nice house, or make a bunch of money, but then they'll start to feel, they'll have this underlying guilt that's there. And it's typically from a too legalistic of a viewpoint in religion, but that's interesting that that's showed up right even outside of the Christian faith.
Yeah. And I mean, even more so, it's like you look at the way that shows up in a lot of people's lives is in infidelity or the lack of deep friendships, where you almost have this desire to sabotage things before they come to fruition, because it's like, well, I'm going to fail anyway. So even, maybe I got the job I never thought I would have. Well, I don't belong here. So I'm going to do something to literally sabotage my career, or I'm going to do something to sabotage this relationship. Or maybe I found this friend that I have this connection with, and he's challenging me in some ways that are healthy. And it's like, man, I'm going to distance myself from them, or I'm going to sabotage this in some way because I've got to hurt them before they hurt me, or I've got to end this before the inevitable happens, which is, to me, that the narrative that I believe is that, well, in the end, like, all things lead to destruction because that is my destiny.
The identity, right? Yeah. So the identity piece of this whole thing. Have you heard of the thermostat analogy?
Yeah, thermostat and thermometer, yeah.
Yep, thermostat, thermometer, and how those play out in our identity, and how if our identity is not rooted in the right place. But even if it is rooted in the right place, as our success or our life or our speaking ability or whatever it is, as it starts to increase, right, there's going to be a natural tendency, just an internal mechanism, that it's going to want to pull you back, right? There's going to be some self-sabotage that's going to start showing up. Like for me, if I'm doing really well, all of a sudden I'll start eating bad, or I'm going to take some time off from my routine. I start doing these things. I'm like, man, why do I have the desire? I mean, this is even recently for me in the last couple of weeks. I'm like, I just have this desire to like slow down. Not because I'm moving too fast, but because I've hit a certain point with I did a bunch of journaling on this, my identity. I've hit the success, and I've created what I wanted to create. I've had the impact I really desire to have. And so I've hit this point. And so now there's this stirring up that's happening, and there's this desire to slow down and stop doing these things and not step into excellence even more. And I'm like navigating this because I want to push through, but then everything's wanting to pull back because my identity is kind of still a little bit behind where I've hit, and so I'm having to having to increase my identity, having to evolve my identity, having to work on getting it to the next level, which I have a process for that. But yes, so even if we're grounded in Christ, right, we still could outdo our identity, and sabotage will show up.
I mean, so like for me, it's like I know we're kind of like all over the place in the story, but so for me, a few months ago, I spoke at Convocation at Liberty University, and I went to Liberty University. And I remember being a student there early on, thinking like, man, I'm so ashamed of my life, and if anyone knew who I was or what I did, number one, they wouldn't want to hear feedback from me or be in cohorts with me talking about this like theological principles. And if my professors knew about me, they certainly wouldn't want to pour into me. And then understanding who God is deeper, like as my theology increased, I became so much less significant in those aspects of my life. I understood those redemptive stories. Not only are they beautiful, but they're useful. And then, standing in front of, 11,000 people, like on during homecoming, saying, this is who I was. Wow. And God didn't, use some of it. Like Romans 8:28, like all means all. Yeah. So he will repurpose and redeem all of it, all of your influence, all of your skills, gifts, talents, experiences, the good, the bad, because Jesus is sovereign over everything. And if you give him everything, he will use everything, every aspect of you, the good and the bad. And that's what I've seen to be true. But to your point, like as I was about to speak that morning, I remember like I almost had a hard time. Like I was excited and expectant, but at the same time, I almost felt guilty for being as excited as I was because I felt so undeserving of being there. It was like looking back of like, the people who generally speak, at Convocation, like Craig Rochelle and like people like that. It's just like, man, I don't belong here. Like, what am I doing here? And then after the fact, it's like the feeling that I felt was this overwhelming love from the Father, in contrast to like me being proud that, I like nailed my communication or I performed well. It was, the feedback that I got was like, man, out of all the talks that we've had here recently, I've never heard anyone more clearly articulate the gospel.
Wow.
And I was like, man, there's no better compliment. It's like, where it's like not like, well, your cadence was great, and it's a 360 stage, so it's like, man, you work the platform well, and I did all those things because those things are important to me as a communicator. But it's like, man, the biggest win for me, it's like, man, you clearly articulated the gospel to 11,000 students, many of them broken, under dying to know, why am I here? What am I supposed to do? And I preached on Ephesians 2:10. It's you're God's masterpiece, and there's things that has been prepared for you by God for you to walk in, and the satisfaction that you desire, to find, the meaning of life for you individually is in your uniqueness in Christ. Like, for you, fully surrendered and submitted to the person of Jesus, walking in the gifts and talents that you have individually, the byproduct of that is you having a joy that is uncomprehendable and unattainable by yourself, or something you can earn out in the world.
Wow. Let's talk about your salvation, or
Yeah. So, man, it's so funny. So, like, I'm in the middle of doing all this stuff in the gym. So I'm about 2 years into that, and I'm crushing it in so many areas of my life. But I'm like, when I lay my head on the pillow, I'm like, still, like, man, I'm still the broken, messed up, person I was. And this girl walks into the gym, like, prettiest girl I ever seen, best athlete in the gym, and I ask her out, and she says no. And it's like, man, fall in love, rejection. It's like, oh man, I'm not used to this. But ask her out on a date, she says no. Ask her to the movies, she says no. She's like, well, I go for a run every Sunday before church. You can meet me for the run if you want. And I was like, I'll take whatever I can get. And I meet her on the run, and I get there early, and I'm like, man, and the way in which a CrossFit gym like generally works regarding the community is like everyone's generally like entrenched in each other's lives, like very deep community. And she was all about the community like while she was there, but she didn't like hang out or like go to any parties or any gatherings we did. She just kind of came there, crushed the workout, and then she was about her business. So it made me think, man, she probably doesn't know my story. She's probably agreeing to this because she doesn't know like any like aspect of my story. So she gets there, I'm like, hey, there's something I gotta tell you about me, and I was like, hey, I'm this kid that his daddy didn't want, and everything that I'm most shamed about, the tons of bad things that I've done, they're readily accessible on the internet for anyone to see. This is who I am. And she was pretty taken back by that. I said much more than that. I went on this like 5-minute monologue, like this is how much I suck.
While you were running, or while you were just
no, we never even
like
we didn't even take a stride. We were walking.
Okay, you just went for it.
yeah. I was like, because like as soon as she got there, I was like, I got to get this off my chest, because I was never like forthcoming with that information. Yeah. The way that I lived, I was like, well, it would come out, and then I would deal with the consequences after the fact.
Yeah.
But with her, I was like, man, I just need to tell her. And I told her, and she was pretty taken back by that, obviously. And her response was like, are you still doing this stuff now? And I'm like, no, it's been 2 years since I've been in that industry, but this is who I am. And she kind of thinks on it, and I could tell like the wheels are spinning, and then all of a sudden she stops and almost like plants her feet. She's an elementary school teacher, it's like that stern, like the teacher, the teacher or the mom, like, look, and she looks me in the eye and she's like, I need you to know something. You are not defined by the worst thing you've ever done. And you're not defined by the greatest thing you'll ever do. I don't want to minimize the pain that you've experienced or the real problems that some of the decisions that you've made has caused in your life. I don't want to minimize that. But I need you to understand that there's one author of you. Do you know who God is? Maybe, I believe he created everything, sure. well, I've been walking with Jesus since I was in 7th grade, and I'm not perfect by any means, but my relationship with him is the foundation from live my life. So what kind of food do you like? Like, are you from outer space? Okay. Like, what? You're just like asking me, like, what kind of food do you like? What's your family like? What are your SMART goals? I'm just like, I'm like, what is going on with this girl? This girl's crazy. And but what she challenged was the thing that I thought was most true about me. I thought I am my identity. I am, this person that his father didn't value or want, and that led me in a way to make decisions that, I lived from that identity. I did a lot of things that I were not proud of, and those things became who I was. This is who I am. But she was like, no. Those are things about you, but that's not who you are. Those things are not the same. Like that's not your identity. You don't get to define yourself based upon what you did. That's not who you are. And that was really challenging for me, but almost invigorating, because I was like, man, maybe what she's saying like has some validity to it. And the way in which, Colossians 4:6 talks about, let your speech be gracious and seasoned with salt. So people might know how, so you might know how you ought to answer each person. And it was almost like the way in which she responded to me, it was catalytic in me having both curiosity and almost like a belief in maybe there's something different than what I'm stuck in. And then she invited me to church, and in church, I was like, man, I'm not sure if I want to be here, but this gorgeous girl, that I'm gonna follow her wherever she's going. Excuse me. And I'm gonna follow her wherever she's going. And we end up in church in Raleigh, North Carolina, and there's this sermon that's preached based on 2 Samuel chapter 9, and this part of the story. So it's David, Ziba, Mephibosheth are the three characters. David, at this point of time, he's kind of at the pinnacle of his reign, and he's asking, like, hey, how can I show loving kindness from God to God's people? He just rebuilt the temple, and he's remembering this covenantal promise that he made to his friend Jonathan. And Jonathan was a son of Saul, and Saul, the kingdom was stripped away from him because of his sin, and David was chosen and anointed to be king, and there was this conflict between the two, and Saul had a son, Jonathan, that actually was warning David, saying, hey, my dad, he's like going to throw the spear at you, or he's plotting on you. And because of his kindness to David, David made a promise to him that's like, hey, I'm going to be your friend, and I'm actually going to show you and your family kindness forever. And he's in this point, further down the road, he's remembering this promise. Jonathan and Saul had been killed in battle, and Mephibosheth was taken when he was 5 to go into hiding. He was actually dropped along the way. The Bible says he ends up lame in both feet, and he was being taken away because anyone that existed that had access to the kingdom, or maybe like perceived access to the kingdom because he was in line to be king at one point, often they would cause this uprising and try to overtake the kingdom. So when the kingdom that existed, they would identify any outliers and have them killed. So he was in hiding because he thought, well, because of who I am, my head's on a chopping block. So he's in this place called Lodabar, which means place of no pasture. It's this like desert wasteland in Palestine. He's in hiding, and David's like, hey, is there anyone left out of this family of Saul? And then someone, Ziba, who was a guard underneath Saul, was like, there is a child. His name's Mephibosheth, and he's in this place. And David sends his guards to go get him. He brings him back before him, and Mephibosheth is thinking, okay, I'm going to die. And David says, hey, I'm going to restore your grandfather's land to you, which was part of Canaan, so the promised land. So it was essentially, he was inviting him into the kingdom of God, saying, I'm going to invite you into my kingdom, and I want you to sit at my table with me, not for a day, not for a week, but forever. And it's just like, this is a beautiful picture of grace. And it was uncomprehendable to Mephibosheth in his response. 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 8, he says, who am I that you show this kindness to me? He refers to himself as a dead dog, essentially saying, hey, don't you know who I am? And I think there's so many times in which The things that have bruised us become our identity, and when we're faced with the grace of God, we can't comprehend it, or we're so certain about who we are, we disqualify ourselves when God is standing in front of us, offering us everything that we've ever hoped, dreamed, or desired. And in that, he's saying, hey, don't you know who I am? And I was like, yeah, me too. I get that, because I understand, like Romans 3:23, everyone, we've all sinned, and we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. So everybody's guilty. Everybody's deserving of death. Then I hear Jesus come into this world, fully God, fully man, fully perfect, faces temptation, never sins, dies on the cross, raises on the third day. And whoever confesses that he's Lord and believes that he was raised on the third day, you will be saved. I'm hearing that, but I'm also thinking, don't you know who I am? So this great stuff, that's amazing for whoever that's for, but I've disqualified myself. My own dad didn't want me. And then he reads Hebrews 12:2. He's talking about the love in Jesus' heart. He says, with the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning our shame, and he sits down at the right hand of God. And there was just something about that where it's like, okay, Jesus is God. He's perfect. And of course, he's perfectly obedient to his Father. Makes sense that he went to the cross willingly. He's omniscient. He knew what was going to happen. As he's being, humiliated and beaten and battered and bruised, he knows death is on the other side. How can he have joy? Joy because he has love. Love in his heart as he went to the cross, because he knew the other side of the cross. Opportunity. You and anyone who will call on the name of Jesus, reconcile. When I understood love for the first time, knocked me to my knees. The disqualification. I didn't know what was next, but I knew that I wasn't who I thought I was. I knew that I had a Father that loved everything, despite, while we were at our worst, he chooses us. So understanding that type of love and the Father that I desired, that I had access, that I'd been adopted into this family, that changed the way that I saw myself. I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I stuck with that girl, and her name is Hope, and we've been married for almost 9 years, and we've got 4 kids. And
I saw her online. It was her smile, man. She's a beautiful woman, but her kindness shows through. Like I can tell she is a very from her picture and from what I was seeing, like she's a bright light.
Yeah, she's the absolute best.
Mm-hmm.
And I just and I think there's just been moments in my life where, God's redeemed and used all of it. He's used all of it, and I feel like our walk with God is like kind of like an onion, in that, salvation, is instantaneous, but sanctification is this process, and throughout the process, it's like, as you feel you've overcome one obstacle, guess what? There's something else. There's something that you push down a little deeper.
Yep.
Or there's an obstacle that you didn't see that's now here. And for me, it was like, okay. Sorry. So for me, it was like, okay, going through premarital counseling, go through other counseling, like going through all this stuff. Not only, Romans 12:2 talks about, we're either being conformed by the world or transformed by the renewing of our mind, so that we can discern what's God's good, pleasing, and perfect will. So there needs to be this metamorphosis that is not instantaneous. It's progressive, in that I'm going to daily take, as thoughts enter my mind, I'm going to discern, like, okay, is this God's good, pleasing, and perfect will? And if it doesn't align with God's word, I'm called to take those thoughts captive and make them obedient to Christ. Mm-hmm. So it's like, so that, Titus 2 talks about, when I say no to ungodliness, I develop a hunger and an appetite for righteousness. My palate begins to change, and I begin to desire to be satisfied by the person of Jesus and sanctified by his word. And so it's progressive in that. So it's like, as I'm going through this, it's like, okay, I'm no longer like really wrestling with lust. but I find myself wrestling with anger. Like why am because like there'll be a time where something will happen and I'll feel like, man, I shouldn't be wrestling with this, or I shouldn't be dealing with this. And even if the lust is my enemy, it's like, man, why am I still wrestling with some of the problems that I feel as if I've conquered? So I find myself angry, like unnecessarily angry, and I bring that to God. And what I begin to discover is these pictures that he was giving me of my dad when he was 16, and the fear that he had and the shame that he felt progressively growing in him. Is when you don't say the thing that you ought to say, the longer time passes, it becomes more difficult to say, not because you don't have the words, it's harder to say them. And, being in close proximity to me, like he wanted to say the right things, but never said them. And as time passed, it became harder. So I began to develop this empathy for him, seeing him as this scared 16-year-old. And what I began to realize is that what I believed was that I made the decisions and I did the things, and the things that happened to me, they were not, derivative of him not being there. It was because he was not there. So it was his fault. Not upon my own volition I made these decisions. It was his fault. My life was this way because of him. And if he would have been there, my life wouldn't have been that way. It was his fault. And what I had to succumb to, number one, it was upon my own volition that I made those decisions. And I'm called to forgive him. And I was afraid to forgive him because what if he didn't change? And when reconciliation doesn't meet our expectations, are we still willing to forgive? Am I willing to forgive my dad even if he doesn't change and become my dad? If the relationship doesn't get better, am I willing to forgive? The person that hurt me, if I can't see in real time them, receive justice, am I still willing to forgive? And at the end of the day, two things are true. I am called to forgive, not because it's for my good, it's because I've been forgiven. And unforgiveness only impacts one person, me. So there was this rage in me that God extinguished, and it was because I had to succumb to, I can't be autonomous in that, because I wanted to maintain some kind of autonomy in that decision. Because if I forgave him, I wanted to do it, and the contention was so he would start being my father. He would show up in my life. He would speak into my life. He would be a grandfather to my kids. So I would forgive him if, and that's not the way it works.
Nope.
And when I was willing to forgive, even if, that is when I saw like significant spiritual growth in my life. So like so I wrote a book called 7 Lies That'll Ruin Your Life, and that's the last chapter. The last chapter is about essentially what the world talks about regarding, cancel culture and what forgiveness looks like from a biblical standpoint.
So good. Man, your story is quite incredible. Now you speak all over the place, sharing that story, bringing hope. Bringing hope. You're a hope dealer.
That's right.
You are, and man, it's and your mess became your message, right? The things that you've gone through, God is now using those for massive good. And so you're very inspiring, brother. I feel like you're just getting started. I really do. I see that this is the beginning phase of what could be possible and the impact that you can have for the kingdom. Right, and all we do is for the kingdom, right? It's for God. It's for the expansion of the kingdom and to bring glory to Him. So I love it, man. I have so many questions I wanted to get to, but that story was just so good. I'll have to have you on another time at some point because you've also become an expert in other arenas, right? Like you're very familiar with, just the devastation that pornography has and the statistics around that. And you're like we mentioned before, you're a pastor. You have, you're just an incredible human being. So we'll get some more time, but I really wanted to hear your whole story, and really, it's extremely inspiring. So no matter how dark one's past is.
I'll just say two things really quickly. Just the fact that, I wrote down on a piece of paper, I'll never be a father. I'll never, be a husband. I'll never contribute to the world in a way that leaves a positive change. Like that was my suicide note.
Wow.
But God's answer to that is Ephesians 3:20. Like God is He stands ready to do exceedingly abundantly more than we could ever hope or imagine. I have all those things. Like, and the fact that God's redeemed my influence in such a way that I've partnered with different people who have poured into my life, and I've had the opportunity to speak at symposiums and testify before Congress and in the Senate multiple times, and I had I had the honor and privilege of being part of the age verification legislation being passed in the state of Texas and 14 other states. And,
Yes.
I'm in DC, quarterly. I'm on the advisory board for image-based sexual abuse, and just the fact that God is putting me in places where I like to jokingly say, like, what the heck am I doing here? That I have no business being here, but God is repurposed and repositioned who I am and my influence, and had me put in rooms and people pour into my life so that I can share with a unique perspective in a way that is impacting culture, legislation, even in a big way, like some of the political things that we're seeing going on in this world. I get to play a small part in those. What a joy it is to do all these things for the kingdom.
Yes. What before we close out, what is let me check with my are we okay on time? Couple okay. So question around the book. So your book, what would you say as we close out? Well, first off, before this question, you answer this question, where can people find you and where can they find the book?
Yeah, so my social media across the board is I am Joshua Broome. And my website is joshuabroome.me, so joshuabroome.me. And the book, 7 Lies That'll Ruin Your Life, you can grab that anywhere books are sold. Buy it off of Amazon, if you don't mind, because that helps the sales and all that good stuff and all the lists. But it came out in March, and it's been amazing to see. But the theme of the book is really, if you were to have to, in one sentence, it's Romans 12:2. Because what it does is like, hey, here is what I thought success was. Here's what I thought intimacy was. Here's what I thought forgiveness was supposed to be. But what I take is 7 big lies that culture tells us regarding how we should feel, how we should interact with the world, and then how me believing those lies were destructive in my life. And then I share someone else's story of how they believed that lie to be true and how that was destructive in their life. And then on the back end, scripture, where by understanding what is actually true, that dismantled and destroyed the lie that I believed, built a new foundation. Thinking about like 2 Timothy 3:16, where it's like all scripture is God breathed and good for teaching and reproof, right? So reproof, to dismantle and destroy. So there needed to be lies in my life dismantled and destroyed and a new foundation built. So the application of truth eroded and eradicated the lie, and then that led to what Jesus talks about in John 10:10, the abundant life.
Mm-hmm. So good. Yeah, it's very necessary. A lot of the work that we do at Ruck has to do with dismantling the enemy's lies. It's a big part of what we do. So if there's a book out there that can support people on that process, quite incredible. So definitely, if you're listening to this, make sure you check out that book. It's every human being needs to dismantle lies and limiting beliefs that they've built, that they've attached onto or that have been attached to them. So final question. So from that book, actually, so what would you say is the number one, as we close out, the number one lie that people that maybe does the most damage?
Yeah, I would say Satan never tells blatant lies. He always tells subtle mistruths. And I think if you start in New York and you're 5 degrees off and you're trying to get to Los Angeles, if you're 5 degrees off, you'll end up in Canada. If you're 5 degrees off, you'll end up in a place that you said that you didn't want to go, you never wanted to be, and you never intended to be there.
Yeah.
So chapter 2, it talks about the God of self in like Exodus 32, where Moses is on the mountain, he's getting the 10 Commandments, and he comes down, and Aaron and his misfits have created this golden calf, this golden animal. And they call this golden animal Elohim, which means essentially a god, and eventually they call the animal Yahweh. So talking about Yahweh that delivered them out of Egypt. And when we superimpose our preferences and the things that we want God to be, and the things that we believe to be most important, and we put that into the box in which we call worship, into the box in which we call us living a Christian life, what we do is we at the end of the day, either Jesus is Lord of our life or we are Lord of our life. And when we call ourselves Christian and we worship things that are not things that we're called to worship, what happens is we end up 5 degrees off. And Satan uses that 5 degrees off, that mistruth about us. It causes us to minimize our capacity, to chase after things that don't matter, and we live in the ruin of what could be. So I would say understanding who you are, because when you know who you are, it doesn't matter who you're not.
Great. Love it. Well, thank you, Joshua, man. It's been a pleasure. Very engaging conversation. I was not even aware that I was in this room. I was fully into your story, man, your powerful life story. Fantastic. Well, thanks for coming out. Look forward to having a conversation soon.
Absolutely. Hope we do many other things together.
Actually, we got, I almost forgot. We have one more segment. We got something special for you. We're going to do this real quick.
Okay.
All right. So we have 3 briefcases, and inside of each of those briefcases is something different. What do we got? And I'll share it through the mic.
So it's 3 gifts.
Yep.
Right? All of them are great.
Okay.
Maybe one is better than the other.
Okay.
3 gifts. All of them are great. I'm going to share the gifts. So one of them's a nail board.
Okay.
You ever stood on nail boards?
Yeah.
Oh, it's
yeah.
a beautiful thing. Okay. The other one is a $500 donation to a nonprofit of your choice.
Okay.
Which we're doing. And then what was the third one?
Through Rock Ministries, by the way.
Yep.
And then this one. Ice bath.
Oh, cold plunge. Okay, we got a cold plunge.
By the way, though, whatever gift you receive, you have to receive it now.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do this. You ready?
Okay. I'm ready.
So,
I'm ready.
do you want briefcase 1, 2, or 3?
I'm gonna go with 2.
2? Feels like here you go. Open it up, and you can just open it up in front of the camera.
Okay.
You can move the mic out of the way. Yeah, there we go.
It's like I don't want to mess up the dramatic effect. There you go.
Let's see what we got in there.
Oh!
The cold plunge, baby.
There we go.
Ice bath. So we got to change clothes for you and everything.
Okay.
He
You ready
says,
for this?
Sure. Yeah.
You can do it?
What time is it?
Time for an ice bath.
we'll make sure the timing works.
Yeah.
All right, man. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah.
Wait, I have one last question you should ask me.
He does have to leave though, so it might have to be a IOU, but we'll see if timing can work. What was the question? Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's for sure gonna have to be.
Yeah.
I should have already left.
All right. Yeah, interesting timing.
I told you that. You can check my calendar. I gotta be in McKinney at 12:30.
Oh, it's so good. You're coming back then. We'll rock some ice bath, cold plunge. Okay, good.
I saw the sauna in there. There's like those. I forget, there was somewhere where there's a sauna where it's like you go like ice bath into like dry sauna and then a cold shower into like steam room.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, this isn't like
That's
this isn't like a funny like prank against me. It's like I love stuff.
Yeah,
like that.
good. Okay, we'll do it together next time then.
Yeah, dude. I'm into it. It's like I saw that room in there. It's like, man, I want to come in here and hang out.
It's a sweet room, totally. All right. Well, thanks, man.